Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for standing by. Welcome to today's conference call. At this time, all lines are on listen only for today's conference. During the question and answer portion of our call, you will be prompted to press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Please be sure to record your name when prompted so that I may introduce you to ask your question. Conference is also being recorded, and if you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I will now turn conference over to our host, Eric Gisa. Sir, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for dialing in today to discuss some recent announcements and enhancements, some significant ones, around Big IP version 11. We're going to be talking about some of the key revolutionary steps, but before we talk about the technology itself and some of the significant functions like our new scale-in architecture and iApps, to put things into context and to demonstrate how this has been a culmination of a vision we've been working toward for quite some time. And this notion of the network transforming what it means to have and design a dynamic data center. We all know, and all of you have experienced, all the various pressures that we see within IT, and the amount of, just let alone the growth of IP traffic, the diversification of it, and especially telling is some of the diversification we're seeing around the API calls being made to all the various services out there in the web. They're growing exponentially. We're talking in the billions of API calls to services like Salesforce and Google and Amazon, and those are just API, and what they represent is the great mashup of various services in the cloud. And then this notion of applications where the ubiquity of apps and the end user's expectations of access and what it means to be mobile and free to access corporate assets on demand as needed and when they want. All these things are putting tremendous strain on the environment. And so we know that over the years, it was used to be very simple. Three-tier designs, some basic services, but as we've grown with the types of devices and apps, things have gotten very complex and not terribly dynamic. In fact, this move toward virtual appliances is in part response to the problems that physical appliances and their management and their overhead and their lack of mobility have created. And so what's required is a new approach and a new thought to prevent the problems that naturally crop up as we design physical and static connections and static mappings from users to resources. Those days are gone. But the problem has been there hasn't been a coherent architecture from a network perspective. What has driven this is virtualization. And virtualization in itself, server virtualization specifically, has been a wonder for becoming the foundation of a dynamic data center. But it is not the be-all, end-all by any measure. We know that while it may abstract the applications in OS, it does nothing to address how do I rapidly provision all the necessary services that wrap around that, all the network, all the server and storage elements and access elements that make that a usable application. Hence, some recent research published by Gartner, where, and this is perhaps one of the most dramatic growth areas in terms of rank in their history, going from number 8 to number 1 in a single year. This notion of managing a flexible infrastructure, what that refers to, all the heavy lifting, a lot of the heavy lifting has been done where we now can virtualize and go from a bare metal server to a running application, what used to take weeks, sometimes months, and now down to minutes. And with all the necessary patches, OS, and application images. The problem is, now that we've got that, how do we provision the network and have that infrastructure just as agile? The problem is it can still take weeks to provision the necessary IP address, to make the configuration changes in the VPN technology, to make sure the DNS settings are up to date and correct, to make sure the application security policies are applied, to make sure the DR load balancing and local traffic management environment is configured appropriately to successfully deliver that out. This is what is reflected in this desire of major CIOs around the world, this flexible, agile infrastructure. Part of our vision, and we announced this almost over 2 years ago, was to say, you know, it's a spectrum. There isn't a be-all, end-all. Nobody just moves right to cloud or all cloud. Nobody virtualizes everything all the time. You have to do what is practical and pragmatic at the moment. The point is to have an architecture that can meet you at each step of the way. And the objective is an infrastructure that is extensible and that starts to take on an IT services or a services-based catalog approach to say, if I am virtualizing, there are certain services I want to apply to that to enable that. If I am moving to a multi-site environment, there are other services I want to add. And likewise, if I'm moving into the cloud, so that I can create a common, repeatable, and reusable architecture that is extensible across the entire spectrum. So, working toward this vision. F5, we knew back in about 2003, 2001, the network had a role to play as a strategic point of control, and a very significant role, beyond just spray and pray packets. That it would be a full participant with the application itself. And by doing so, we could do tremendous things and drive tremendous cost savings in things like offload. By the principle of offload, to say, to do one-offs in each and every application is not efficient. To centralize and offload certain common functions so that they're repeatable, whether I've got a custom application based on Apache, whether I have Microsoft applications, whether I have virtual desktop VDI infrastructure from Citrix or VMware or Microsoft, or whether I'm running Oracle applications, whatever. You want a common reusable architecture, but in order to do that, we knew we had to have a very application-fluent data plane. That was version 9, where we introduced and pioneered the concept of application fluency as we coined the term of application delivery. Now, we also knew that once we developed that very rich TMOS full proxy architecture, we needed to scale. And hence we introduced and pioneered and invented clustered multiprocessing, which was another first, as well as the Viprion hardware architecture. Now, CMP was a better alternative than what existed then, which was symmetric multiprocessing, simply because as we added cores to the system, we could get true linear scale. Using our proprietary CMP technology. The Viprion architecture was designed to take advantage of that. And we had the intent of moving that high end all the way down to mid-market, which we recently announced with the Viprion 2400. Now, building on top of that, many of you know that have been customers for quite some time. We've done many acquisitions over the years around application security, VPN and access control and identity and access management, WAN optimization, web acceleration, and even storage optimization. And the whole intent of these acquisitions that we knew, again, the principle of having a common reusable architecture meant things, we had to have TMOS, a pluggable full proxy architecture, of which these things could plug into, so that we could have a shared common architecture and infrastructure. We accomplished that with version 10. However, and those of you that have been customers of ours for quite some time, we know integration does not equate to unification. Just having things running on the same platform does not necessarily mean they talk or interoperate or leverage each other as effectively as they could or should. But it was a key milestone on our road to enabling the dynamic data center. Version 11, this is what this is all about. It's kind of it's phase one of the culmination of this vision, where the network begins to transform from a series of physical or virtual devices that don't necessarily talk to one another, but an integrated application control plane, one that understands the context of the user to application session and the policies you want to frame. This is why we say it is so revolutionary. Like version 9, this has been in the works for over probably 2.5 to 3 years. There's a tremendous amount of intellectual property and design in the underlying architecture of this, which we'll get to. So, the vision has been this notion of a very flexible, agile infrastructure, where we've seen the network should be treated as a set of reusable services or resources, a pool of resources. We pioneered this back in the day when we integrated, we were the first to integrate SSL in our load balancing technology. SSL as a central service to be applied across all applications. It was not only more cost-effective from certificate management standpoint, but in overall management, but it was also more cost-effective because instead of doing SSL termination, encryption and decryption on each and every physical server, it made sense to do it in a couple strategic points within the network itself. Carry that principle forward to today, and we start to look at things like the better model for ensuring data loss prevention is to write, for example, an iRule or a policy, an iRule in LTM or a policy in ASM, Application Security Manager, that looks for HTTP responses that contain credit card or social security numbers and strip them out. Instead of doing that on each and every single application and trying to audit each and every one of those in your distributed environment, if we can do it in a couple places, it becomes much more manageable, predictable. That's the principle of a reuse. We're carrying that forward with this because one of the challenges you and we have had is how do we start to unify all these reusable resources and associate them with a logical construct that becomes much more operationally efficient for you, where we move from applications to applications and services orientation, not objects and devices, whether physical or virtual, and it maintains context, understands the context of the user to application session, and also understands the context of why the TCP optimization is so important to that user session, along with the DNS infrastructure as well as the AAA infrastructure. These things are critical components of an overall application control plane. And of course, the fundamental principle of F5 is it must be as open as possible and integrate with a broader ecosystem. So think of F5 as that abstraction layer between every critical tier in a dynamic data center. And I'm not saying that you have to deploy all of our devices all over the place. That is not the principle. The principle is do as much as you can, as much as is pragmatic, in a few strategic points of control so that we can reuse and begin to manage this more cost effectively. So what are we doing about this? And when we talk about this overall, think of everything we do as starting to look not as individual devices or products, but as a culmination of a toolbox of application delivery services to be reused over and over again, like you see here, listed here. This is what we mean by the application control plane. Now, we know the foundation of this are two critical new architectural components. The iApp, which now, for the first time, and we'll get into this a little bit more detail, the network starts to behave and can be provisioned as rapidly as your back-end virtual infrastructure. And it can be done so with an amount of predictability and consistency that's been, quite frankly, unprecedented, and maintaining the context of those services in relation to that application. What this means is we're working toward achieving that primary objective of those CIOs out there saying, look, we've done the work on the back end. We can provision a bare metal server to running app in minutes, but darn it anyhow, the network is still in the way. This is our first phase in overcoming that, and it's a key architectural underpinning. And then the scale-in architecture. You've heard much brouhaha out there and a lot of misinformation about what is scale and what is not. And we'll get into this more, but the scale-in architecture is building on our market-leading clustered multiprocessing technology. And the wonderful thing is scale-in is an architecture that works both for our physical appliances as well as our virtual appliances. They should be indistinguishable because depending upon your deployment and your needs and your scale requirements, you need to have the flexibility of determining what is appropriate for you, not being dictated by a vendor saying it's all virtual appliances all the time or it's all physical appliances all the time. No, it's up to you and depending upon the deployment scenario and the capacity needs of the environment. We'll get to that. So, the iApp revolution, F5's iApps, the principle is, okay, we know, and the fundamental business problem, to provision a network in a predictable, consistent, and accurate manner was fraught with a ton of errors. How do we know this? Well, back in 2007, on the road to this notion of a dynamic data center, F5 Pioneer did another first. We took all of our products in our portfolio, and we put them into a simulated network environment. And we did exhaustive testing in front of applications like Microsoft Exchange or Oracle 10G or SAP NetWeaver or IBM WebSphere. And what we did is we said, okay, what's the best architectural model to secure access to this resource, to make sure it's highly available and scalable, that we can create a disaster recovery posture for it, that we can accelerate and offload from it so it performs better, and that we do these things in a very logical, methodical way. What came out of that were these notions, these deployment guides, these reference architectures that were very detailed around application-ready deployments. That's what we called them. Now, to develop that was an investment on our part of probably anywhere from 3 to 6 months, 2 FTEs, to do that testing and documentation and validation, and then the publishing of the document. And these are not your run-of-the-mill engineers. These are highly trained, over 2,000 hours of experience over 5 years each to develop these types of guides. That was huge, but that was not necessarily the best solution. Why? Well, to give you an example, the Microsoft Exchange 2010 deployment guide is 180 pages long, and as good as it can be, it still might not work for the environment. The second thing is it contains 1,200 configuration steps, which gives you a 100% chance of error. And so what iApp is about a new framework to unify all the services and describe them in a way, goal-driven, that removes that design consideration, and we can now deploy all the necessary services for that particular application, going from what took days and was world-class down to minutes. And they're portable. So think of it as a container of a description of all the necessary services that can be shared between F5 devices. So if you have a best practice team or an architecture team that is defined in iApp, it allows for being able to check in to a CMDB, to version control it, to do it in this test and staging environment, and then publish it and roll it out into the broader workforce in your organization. So think of iApp as it's very application-centric. It's associating all of the necessary services that stripe across F5's product portfolio with the application and understands the context. And it will maintain that, and I've got a picture of that as well. And to create this rapid and predictable deployment. So what does this look like in reality, and what are some of the other benefits? We think that iApp, too, because more increasingly F5 is being moved out of a pure network engineering team role to what's being called DevOps or even AppOps, application operations, which is kind of a mashup of application and network teams as well as security and systems and server teams. And we believe, and we've seen this, that iApp can serve as a lingua franca to make the most use out of the existing technology that you own today, and a way for collaboration between teams, all up and down the stack. So think of this again, just to reiterate. iApp is a representation of all the services that are part of F5's product portfolio, whether it be for availability, security, or acceleration and optimization. So, what used to look like this, and for those of you that are long-term Big IP local traffic manager customers, this should be very familiar to you. It's easy to lose context in this model, and this is true of every network vendor out there, where they tend to take, and F5 was no exception, tend to take a very device-centric or object-centric view. The problem is, as my environment grows, how do I associate the context of which monitors apply to which pools appropriately for which application? This created problems and impacted the ability to be agile in the environment. What we do is iApp changes that construct and say there's a higher level of abstraction that says, no, we're going to associate those services that are part of ASM, Application Security Manager, Global Traffic Manager, Local Traffic Manager, Access Policy Manager, the Edge Gateway, whatever it might be, and associating those with a particular application, whether it's a commercial off-the-shelf app or it's some custom internet-designed application. The power of this then is once it's defined, the configuration can be auto-generated. This is what is meant by creating that predictability, and we're moving from a notion of managing devices to managing services consistently across the environment. What does this look like? It starts with an application template, but it is much more than an application template. Number one, it is reentrant, as I'll show you shortly. But secondly, it's also customizable, and these are modular components that are meant to be reused. So, in this example, you see for Microsoft Exchange, we have analytics that we want to associate with that. Okay, these are goal-driven questions. Do you want to enable analytics? Analytics portion could be a common reusable component that you might want to associate with every application. So it becomes something that is associated with every iApp. That's what we mean by creating the predictability and consistency in the network architecture and design, the application network architecture and design. And then the same with the global questions. Do we have reason to manage the connections route back to the application clients via the system or not? And how many users? And are you deploying Outlook Web App? And the necessary configuration that has to go on behind the scenes here is taken care of for you. And of course, this is customizable by architects themselves, but it gives a framework, and this is why we meant a framework for discussion and integration and collaboration among different product teams, whether they be from the application side of the house, the network, the security, the systems, or the operations. This then allows for consistent, predictable automation and provisioning of the F5 application delivery network, allows for much more rapid change management and consistent predictability, because now I'm not hunting around all of our products to find the necessary services associated with this. They're in one place, and of course these are portable. And they're all designed to be, the reuse, like I said, the analytics, or if it was SSL, or you might have some acceleration settings that says, oh, for these types of applications, I always want to use compression, caching, and these TCP optimization settings. And that becomes part of every single iApp that gets developed in a consistent and predictable manner. It's extended to our entire product portfolio, as I mentioned several times, and you see this is, for SharePoint, an example how simple it's going to be to apply application security and also acceleration functions. This is what it looks like. So translate the iApp from a deployment scenario to then all the objects that are necessary to deliver that, the services associated with that application, and shows their dependencies. In this single view now, I can manage my entire F5 product portfolio that is all on the same physical or virtual device. This is a first, where we're showing the context and the association, and you can edit right from this view as well. That's what we mean by reentrancy, is once I've configured, say, for example, the WAN optimized compression profile for SharePoint, if I do need to make any changes, I make it through this view, and I'm not having to hunt around the system to make that change. And anything else that is dependent upon or sharing that as a configuration object would inherit it. Okay? Again, this creates the consistency, predictability, as well as the portability between F5 devices. This is why we say iApp is more than just some kind of simple templating. It is an overall fundamental architecture meant to be associated with a broader workflow type environment, and bringing the network into the fold and make it as rapid to provision as the virtual servers on the back end, virtual machines on the back end. Now, we've shipped to version 11 with a bunch of these predefined. And again, you can access these and customize them as well. We will continue to ship more via DevCentral. This is big. iRules have become very strategic for not only F5 but for our customers. Why? Because it's the ultimate in adaptability and flexibility without having to reinvent the wheel. We have seen customers time and time again save tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars by being able to write one iRule to address an application issue instead of having to try and redesign and rewrite everything on the back end. This is what we mean by being a full participant with the application. Now, if we can take that up a level and we say iApps are these best practice constructs of how to optimally deliver services associated with an application. And we can start to drive the community-driven innovation that, quite frankly, has driven F5 success via vehicles like DevCentral. It becomes very powerful. You could see this becoming a marketplace, if you will, albeit free for right now, but a lot of value-adding sharing and collaboration and design work to be done here. Now, it's not only beneficial from an open standpoint from that perspective, but we have customers of ours, and I'm sure many of you can associate with this, where if you're a multinational or you have many distributed sites, potentially globally or around the country, that you will find some people have more expertise around F5 technology than others within your organization. These people are the ones that should be defining the configuration and the architecture. But the challenge has been how to codify that and create the predictability so that that architecture and those designs can be easily shared. We know documentation is important on such things, but writing documentation is still fraught with error. If we can associate really good documentation on the proper architectural design, but also develop an iApp that's associated with that, it gives us the ability to share this across our organization, again, to create predictability. We have large global banks that have operations all around the world, and in certain locations they have absolutely stunning Big IP global traffic management experts that have written iControl applications and other services and scripts and such in a way that can automatically swing data centers based upon certain events, etc. For others to implement that around the globe is a bit tricky for them because there's some moving parts and they are distributed. With iApp, we start to create a framework to codify that so that that work can be more shared and more predictable as it's distributed within the organization itself. So, quick example here. This was real interesting, and the power of iApp and the adaptability of it. One of the product managers here on the PM team, who focuses on the federal government, was reading the latest NIST standards. And he went to one of the product management engineers and said, hey, you know what? all the requirements for being NIST compliant. There's be a lot of configuration steps, and I could see, non-experts in F5 kind of stumbling trying to figure this out. It wouldn't be very consistent or predictable. Is there some way we could potentially write an iApp that would make anybody who applied the iApp NIST compliant? And so they and within a couple hours, this iApp was created. So it meets all the compliance of NIST, and this is a first. I mean, there is no other way to describe and abstract up a layer, all the necessary services, and be able to codify it so rapidly. Again, going back to that first principle of CIOs, want an agile infrastructure. I want the network to get out of the way. I want the network to play a greater role and a more flexible role in the delivery of services, which really is kind of, them describing the outcome desires of cloud-based principles. Now, because iApp can begin to unify all the elements into a common framework and services, for the first time, and many of you have asked for this. I'm sure a lot of you are grinning on the phone right now, and a lot of you I've talked to about this, where you've said, darn it anyhow, you guys collect great information in Global Traffic Manager, you've got really good information in Local Traffic Manager, and then you got great information in Access Policy Manager and the Application Security Manager, but there's no correlation or unification of that stuff. They're all isolated islands. Well, with iApp, it's the first step in beginning to unify that. Why? Because now we have a higher level object, the application, which we can associate those services to and start to show the performance of the application and related services, the things that we already see. We just didn't have that before, that construct of to say, is there a higher level object beyond the product and the device and the virtual appliance itself that can unify these things, and it's iApp. This is why, again, we say it's so significant. Now, a key feeding point to that, and again, a lot of you have asked for this. In order to get better understanding of your F5 architecture and environment and the application control plane, you need to see very detailed statistics on a per object basis, and especially down to per virtual, okay, and the profiles themselves. That's delivered. This is a major architectural underpinning, and it's all about giving you the tools so that you can start to do things like better capacity planning and associate those metrics with particular applications. Going a little further, you want to also see, okay, what's the contribution to the system level consumption? This eventually could be incorporated into things like bill back. Again, because more and more of our customers, and all of you are aware of this because you tell us, are running your organizations as a IT as a service. And so the better tools you have in the network to quantify that, the better, and potentially bill back for it. Now, another key element, and it's in the spirit of an open open ecosystem and API kind of a spirit, but we have a lot of customers that use our need logging for a variety of purposes. It could be security events, it could be application debugging events, error codes you want evented, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We needed to create a unified architecture that would allow every product to tap into the high-speed logging engine and allow you to event based upon terms that you design. By the way, this is also a service that could be incorporated into an iApp, okay? So you could have specific events you always want logged and looked for and associate that with every single iApp. It could be a security event, for example. The nice thing is then, there are a lot of security management systems out there that need to consume this information and correlate it from other devices as well. So this is part of, again, our way to integrate into a broader ecosystem environment, and we see high-speed logging, and by the way, this is unprecedented performance. We saw on our 8950 in testing with a very advanced I rule, with logging and without logging. And with logging only added at 200,000 high-speed logs per second, only added about 6% overhead to the CPU itself. The bottleneck will be the consumption of the server, how much the server that we're writing to could consume. So you've got a very powerful full proxy strategic point of control that you're able to leverage and incorporate into a broader environment and ecosystem. Okay, so now we get to scale in. Think of this as the ultimate in elasticity and resiliency. This isn't just about scale up, it's also about scale out. And you will see a ton of misleading and false claims from other vendors about, what it really means to scale and how much you can scale. First and foremost, we design special purpose hardware. The VIP-Brown was a great case in point of this. Traditional chassis systems, you had a separate management blade, you had a separate I/O blade, you had a separate compute blade, and then others that are based on blade server or server technology that is not necessarily enterprise or carrier class, are traditional reference design server motherboards, can fail or not. We were the first to integrate all compute management and CPU, or compute management and I/O in a single blade and allow that blade that as you add more, you doubled in capacity. It was linear scale. The software allowed us to take advantage of the hardware, and then the problem we had is we looked at virtualizing in this environment, and none of the hypervisors were ready yet to be able to give us the performance we needed in direct access to hardware. So we had to invent our own and enter virtual clustered multiprocessing, which allows us to carve up the environment within our own system for very dedicated and separate multi-tenancy, but also very flexible failover models. But then add to this the device service cluster concept, which is N of M, which is the scale out. Now, this would be interesting if it was just, pure raw capacity added. But it's more than just being able to scale up linearly within our own device, carve it, and then be able to add another component so I can run active in this environment and get better utilization. But it's also designed to support the iApp and app workload concept. So it's also enabling very unique failover and capacity adjustment, workload adjustment, depending upon the capacity of a device in that service cluster. This gives unprecedented. Nobody else in the industry is doing anything like this for prioritization of workloads and dedication of workloads within that service cluster, and also the ability to avoid service disruptions by defining new high availability models. And it applies not just to our chassis, but to our appliances, as well as the virtual appliances themselves. Again, another industry first. This is why we say this is really a revolution here. What we're looking, and hopefully you're getting the sense that we're talking about being able to unify and describe services in a higher level object called an iApp, be able to unify those and provide the visibility, and then be able to scale in architecture that allows you to grow and shrink on demand depending upon capacity while maintaining your failover and DR scenarios. Again, the architectural underpinnings of this are massive. And so think, the device service cluster, by the way, isn't limited. And this goes back to our notion of a very extensible, flexible architecture that can not only span within a data center itself, but multi-site. Remember that spectrum I was talking about, where we got to meet you where you're at? You might not be ready to do this today, but it's in preparation for tomorrow, to be able to define a device service cluster that spans the WAN and the data center. But not just the WAN, but even into a cloud provider, providing a common, repeatable application control plane based upon a common set of services that are reused over and over and over again. The principle isn't to just sell you more product. The principle here is to enable you to create an architecture and leverage the technology which most of you already own in much deeper and broader capacity. And again, it will apply to much more diverse and flexible deployment models. It spans the WAN and can even span whether it's a public, private cloud, or multi-site environment, creating a unified framework for consistently delivering application services across the network. Again, what we're calling an application control plane. Now, the traditional approach. Talk about scale up by taking an ADC and turning on a license key and going from 1 gig to 2 gig or 5 gig to 10 gig. Now, as I add, that's not really adding capacity on demand. It's just licensing what you already own and what you already paid for and what you should have gotten in the first place. The second thing is the whole virtual appliance. What good is it scaling if I don't have a way to manage and unify these services? I still have this configuration proliferation and nightmare. So I really don't have a flexible architecture. And again, that's what we were working to address these last 3 years, is the ScaleLAN, the iApp, and the automated policy sync architecture. Now, so a number of firsts here. This is kind of, F5's way, and all of these, hopefully you on the phone that are existing customers recognize, and you say, finally, oh, God, I've been banging on F5 for years to start working on this stuff, making my environment more operationally efficient, letting me make better resource utilization of my existing devices by going into an active standby mode, for example, and by being able to share information between distributed devices across the WAN. A number of industry firsts that hopefully all of you recognize. Now, in the interest of time, there are over 150 new functions that stripe across our entire Big IP product portfolio, the full family. We don't have time to get into those. However, we will have some subsequent webinars that will get into specifics around DNS or also our security enhancements. There is a lot more to than what I just talked about. What I focused on today were the architectural underpinnings. And so I encourage you to stay connected to F5 and look for those webinars. And the whole principle is, again, meet you at every step of the way. For those of you that have used us traditionally for load balancing and high availability and maybe some global server load balancing, you can take what you got and you can start looking at how do we apply it in a more dynamic virtual environment. What can we do to offload those to create greater virtual machine density? What can we do to participate more creatively and flexibly within the overall workflow and orchestration environment? And then how do we bring in and not lose control of how we manage security and SLAs to the cloud, but we leverage the cloud intelligently while the enterprise maintains control. So a common services architecture and platform. Now, to get more out of this, before we shift to questions, Q&A, there's a couple things I'd ask you to do to learn more about this. And again, the principle is to leverage better what you already own and to think about how you're going to be able to leverage version 11, because it comes along if you're under standard maintenance. It's a great value. Schedule an F5 architectural review with your account team. Okay? And it's not to review an existing configuration or anything like that. It's to review all the services that you already own that maybe you don't know about, that you can think about leveraging. And then, taking that a step further, we're also available to host things like lunch and learns. So if you are a network administrator or in operations or a network architect, and you go, boy, it's time to break out of the mold. I want my application folks to understand this better. I want my security folks. I want the people that are running the servers and virtualization infrastructure to understand this better. Also, lunch and learn. We'll buy the pizza, and we'll come in and we'll run a session to say, here's all the things that we can do. And then on top of that, please subscribe and contribute to F5 Dev Central. It's a wealth of information. You can start with iApps and start asking questions there and extend iRules and iControl, etc. We're there to help you succeed. Leverage our solutions, and then by all means, if you haven't yet used F5's iHealth, please do so. It is one of the most awesome online tools for validating your configuration against known bugs or potential conflicts or issues. Free service, best in class. And also, we just announced all of the things around version 11. We have free web-based training online, so you can get more familiar yourselves. And then, lastly but not least, we have world-class international technology centers. This is where we run our own proof of concepts and do our design work around things like how we design an iApp for Apache or how we design an iApp for Microsoft SharePoint or Oracle 10G. These centers are also meant for you, and they're free of charge. They're staffed with highly trained engineers. We can do executive briefings. We can do demos. We can do basic proof of concepts, discuss architectural issues, etc. It's meant to be a resource for you. Again, the principle of leverage what you already own as best as you can that's appropriate for your environment. So please take advantage of that. There's a lot of things here for you to transform your network into a much more dynamic environment, enabling the dynamic data center. And with that, I'd like to turn it over for Q&A. And I also have Ty Tran here with me, who's one of our senior product managers, who is intimately involved with version 11, and also is he's our go-to guy for all major accounts, product management. So, operator, I'd like to turn it over to Q&A.
Thank you. At this time, if you wish to ask a question, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Please be sure to record your name when prompted so that I may introduce you to ask your question. Once again, it is *1 at this time. Please stand by for questions. We have a question from Matthew Morrissey. Your line is open.
Can you talk a little bit about IP version 6?
Oh, version 6 support? Well, as you know, we've got native support, and we also support the now officially out of the box DNS 6.4 and NAT 6.4. And there's going to be some subsequent enhancements coming shortly around supporting our route domains capability as well. But so there are certain products that don't yet support IP. The LTM is the primary, and local traffic manager and global traffic manager primary products that support fully IPv6. Now, Access Policy Manager will in the next release, as will Application Security Manager.
So we've offered IPv6 gateway functionality since early 9.0, I believe. We've since 10x introduced that as a basic feature within Big IP, so you don't have to purchase it in addition. And as Eric says, we're moving forward with supporting that on our module. So LTM and GTM again supported today. We're picking up APM and ASM support in the future, in the next coming release.
Oh, okay, there's a web question. It's a very good one. And it says, can an iApp provision services across multiple devices? I'm really glad you brought this up, Andrew. No. This version, no. The services have to reside on the same physical or virtual appliance. But the underpinnings are there, the centralized management infrastructure. So the next release is designed and targeted for supporting the multi-site or multi-device deployment. But we have to start here first. So that was a good question. Thank you. That gave me an opportunity to clarify. Okay, there's a second web question. Can you expand on the performance impact of applying analytics? Very good question. Okay, so this comes from Jamie C. So there's several facilities for analytics. There is something I didn't mention, just in the interest of time, called iStats that is part of iApp, okay? That facility will produce metrics associated with the iApp, and there is very little performance cost to that. I mean, it's negligible. You wouldn't even notice it. The AVR, the Application Visibility Reporting function, will come with a potential performance hit, as much as if you're turning everything on, you could see up to a 30% load of CPU, okay? Now, since that time, the target is to work toward no more than a 10% impact. And that's one reason why AVR today, we don't charge for it. We give it away free as just basic analytics. But that was a very good question. So we want to be sure people size appropriately based on this. But typical scenarios, we see customers only running at 30 to 40% capacity. So it would be safe to say if they feel like they're not running too hot at 70%, that's good. And then also the other thing that helps is running in being able to do N of M in the device service cluster. That saves money in scaling up as well, so that you can add some of these new services without incurring too much of a cost.
We do have another question on the phone.
Okay. Yeah.
It comes from Kent Perrier. Your line is open.
Yes. As far as upgrading to version 11, what are the limitations as far as our older hardware? What do we need there to be able to install version 11?
So version 11 is an all 64-bit release. So we've upgraded our basic OS to 64-bit. So if you have an old platform that runs 32-bit processors, 1500s and 3400s are no longer supported. But beyond that, there are no platforms.
Well, they're supported. They just won't run version 11.
Right.
Yeah. But so if you're running a 1600, 36, 39 on up, you're going to be fine. There's another web-based question. It says, will the presentation be available to download after the webinar? Yes, it will be. And actually, what I'd encourage you to do, we're not going to post it on the public website, but I would please engage with your account team or reach out to your account team, and they'll be able to forward it on to you. And there was another question around the same thing where they wanted to know where they could get the presentation. So, operator, are there any other phone-based questions?
We have no other questions on the phone at this time, sir.
Okay, and we have no more on the web, unless somebody wants to type one last minute. Other than that, we're good to go, it looks like. Thank you all for joining. I hope this was valuable, and if anything, please reach out to your account team, not to sell you something new, but just to learn more about version 11 and how you can leverage what you already own much more deeply and broadly than what you're probably doing today. It's all about us helping you become successful. So thanks again for your time. Ty, thank you. Cecile, thanks for arranging this. Everybody have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you, operator.
You're welcome. That does conclude today's conference call. We thank you all for participating. You may now disconnect and have a great rest of your day.